And we're live. Hello and welcome to episode number 13 of the Citadel of Hype Podcast. Today, I am super excited to be joined by my always weird co-host, Secrets of the Citadel, but we are joined by a very, very special person today, one of our favorite YouTubers and content creators within the Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones community, David LML, Lucifer means Lightbringer. What's up, man?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at the chat. I totally spaced out. I didn't. Oh, wait, no, we're not supposed to say that yet, right? That's for later.
Happy 420. Go ahead now.
Oh, sorry, guys. Hey, man, are we live? No, thanks for having me on, guys. I'm very privileged to be the first guest here, as you just told me, on the Citadel of Hype podcast. I'm fully in the Citadel. I have my Maester's chain of plastic green pot leaves around my neck, celebrating 420, and I'm hyped fully. So thanks for having me on. It's lucky episode number 13, which couldn't be more perfect for Lucifer means Lightbringer.
Wow, that made me moist. I know everyone likes the word moist in chat, so that's why I chose to say that specific word. Thank you for joining us, LML. For those of you who don't know him, he does mythical astronomy, and we're going to talk a little bit about that after. And as well, of course, we have Gemma.
Hi, yeah, I'm Gemma from Secrets of the Citadel YouTube fame. I'm really happy to be here today. I hope you're all having a wonderful day, and thanks for joining us in the chat. We're going to be talking about Daenerys Targaryen. Danny, we're going to talk about her, the blonde one. We're going to talk about her today, so let's just get it, yeah?
So we're going to talk about Daenerys Targaryen, and we're also going to preview our panel at Con of Thrones together. For those of you that didn't know, mine and Gemma's first panel will actually be on Friday, and it's called The Warrior of Light, and we're going to be actually joining LML, and it's going to be really fun, and we're going to talk about the best candidates for Azor Ahai in the show and in the books. And today we're actually talking about one of those candidates, Daenerys Targaryen. And David, something that we have talked about before this podcast is archetypes. And of course, Carl Jung was very instrumental in teaching us about what this actually means. But can you give us a more detailed outline of Daenerys as an archetype? Because she's a very unique character. She's not the typical woman or heroine we see within your hero's journey story.
So no, she's that's a great question. I'm glad you kicked that one to me. So Daenerys, Drogo actually labels her pretty thoroughly. So Drogo calls her Moon of My Life, Moon of My Life, famously. And she in turn calls him her Sun and Stars. And that sets up the sort of sun and moon relationship. And of course, the Dothraki believe that the sun and moon are god and goddess, who are, man and wife, if you will, god and goddess wife, however you say that. So with Dany and Drogo, you've got this Solar King and Lunar Queen relationship. The thing is that Dany isn't just the passive Lunar Queen. She transforms into the last dragon, which is kind of like an archetype that she takes on from Rhaegar. And that whole thing goes down in the pyre when she wanders into the pyre like the moon wandering too close to the fire of the sun. We'll talk about that. And hatches the dragons, and she herself becomes the last dragon. And now she's more like a king or a conqueror herself, instead of so it's not, I won't say that she becomes like the male side of the archetype, but she becomes more of like a male and female, or maybe even a wrathful goddess type. And that sort of matches her character progression from someone who's at first basically powerless, and she's a pawn, and she's being sold off and married off, and she's abused by her brother. And then, of course, she stands up to her brother. She takes the power in the relationship with Drogo. And then when Drogo dies, she becomes Khaleesi, which is, just a feminine version of the king, if you will. So that's a first glimpse at it. We'll talk a little bit more about that question, but how's that for a start?
And it's really interesting because, we look at the elements of ice and fire, and fire is usually something we associate with a masculine type of archetype, right? War, the god Ares and Mars, and all these Roman myths, and that I find very interesting. And we obviously hear about Aegon the Conqueror, the very first person who kind of really started to establish the Targaryens within Westeros. So Daenerys is kind of a mirror image of Aegon, but in a female form, in my opinion. But Daenerys.
Sorry to jump in, Kyle, but I forgot to say that Drogo actually, when he's trying to sound out her name, he says Daenerys, and it's spelled DAN-ARES, and ARES, of course, is the war god. So there's even a hint that Daenerys is actually the feminine war god, which is in fact what she is.
My mind was just blown, everyone. I think we should just end the podcast right here, and we're good to go. No,
did you not know that one?
No, and I just thought of that right now. The way we spell Aries is A-E-R-I. So we spell Aries differently, but now Eris and Aries is very similar. Wow.
Ares being the Greek god of war, who actually was a bit of a pussy, if we're going to get into that. But but yeah, I mean, this sort of this male personification of a very timid female, who we see in the early stages. Obviously, she just wants to go home. She doesn't really know where her home is. She has all this thing with the red door and all of this symbolism. She moves away from the red door. She embraces the waking of the dragon, and yes, she essentially becomes this embodiment of Aegon the Conqueror reborn, the move from the feminine Luna into the masculine fire, but she's very much still bound by the constraints of her gender within this world. The Khalasar leave her, they abandon her. The majority of them will not follow a woman. A few of them change their mind when they see that she's done this amazing thing with the fire and the dragons and what have you. But she doesn't have dragons and suddenly become this conquering queen. She still has a hell of a journey in front of her at that point, doesn't she? I've been looking at archetypes as well, specifically different types of archetypes in literature. And I found a few that I think Danny could actually fall into. But just as a bit of fun in the chat, I do like to get you guys involved. I am reading what you're saying. I'm going to list off some of these, and I want you to, pick one of these archetypes and tell me your favorite character that falls into each archetype. One would be the underdog hero. Who's your favorite underdog hero within the Song of Ice and Fire? What about you, Kyle? Who's your favorite underdog hero?
I mean, it's the dog himself, the Hound.
Yeah, that's kind of the one that lends.
Well, he's kind of an anti-hero, but yes, I mean, he's having a redemptive arc.
Yeah, I think mine would be Brienne. We've got the hero's secret royal heritage. We've got the redeemed hero. We've got the hero's mentor, and then we've got the heroic transformation. And I did save that one for last because we're talking about Dany.
And Azor Ahai as well.
Yes. So these are so there's the underdog hero, the hero's secret royal heritage, the redeemed hero, the hero's mentor, and the heroic transformation. And Dany could actually fall into several of these. I mean, she's the underdog at the outset, isn't she? Her heritage isn't secret, but it's certainly something she's trying to regain. But yeah, more so, Dany falls into this heroic transformation archetype, doesn't she? The hero, she's also like a messianic figure in a way. She's like this Joan of Arc type character, or a lot of people have said Jesus Christ. She's got a lot
King Arthur as well, Gemma. We've talked about that, like the being in exile. John is closer to King Arthur because he doesn't know his heritage, but Daenerys knows her heritage, but she's still in exile in Essos, and she knows that she came from Westeros.
Yeah. I mean, she's, I like the Jesus Christ symbolism, but I mean, a lot of people say, she's got this God complex. That she thinks that she's this savior of mankind, and I know a lot of people have got turned off by Dany's character pretty much the moment she got dragons, But I don't necessarily think people disliking Dany was George R. R. Martin's intention. He went to great pains in that first book to set her up as somebody that we had a great deal of sympathy for. She becomes this defender of slaves. She tries to fight evil. Yes, she makes some shocking mistakes, but I don't dislike her, but she's definitely not my favorite character. I mean, in the chat, while I pass this on to LML and Kyle, how do you actually feel about Dany as a character? Some people, she really splits people. Some people just think she's amazing, and some people just think she's the worst. Let us know where you are on that, and I'll pass this on to you guys because I've banged on enough.
Yeah, I got to get in on this. I love Dany, and I will defend Dany anytime. She does have flaws, and it's totally valid to criticize those flaws. I mean, she's intended to have flaws. She's not intended to be a perfect character, but I think she's written really well. I like most of her decision making, and even her bad decisions. You can totally understand where she's coming from. But let's go back to that first book. I think that sometimes people read fantasy and they don't like, they're just so used to everything being dialed up to 10 that they don't stop and really make a scene real for themselves and think about what this character is feeling. Like she's on the run. She's growing up with an abusive older brother as her only family. She has really no home. And then I was listening to Nauticast the other day, and they were rereading the wedding scene to Khal Drogo. And I mean, God, was that terrifying. She's 13 and she's being sold off to these foreigners, to be the wife of this giant, intimidating guy
Barbarian.
who doesn't smile. I mean, Jesus Christ. And then she makes the best of that and goes along, and she's doing well for herself. Keep in mind, all the time she's having these psychedelic dreams about dragons either roasting her with fire or being covered in blood and talking to her. Crazy ass shit. And then she's going on. Her everything is fine until Drogo all of a sudden falls off his horse. And people start explaining to her what this means. She's like, no, your son isn't going to be the next Khal. They're going to kill him, and they're going to send you to Vaes Dothrak after they're done raping you. And this whole thing is over, and everybody's leaving, and the Khal's dead. And then you have this crazy scene with the witchcraft, Miriam Azor, and she wakes up after all that, and her baby is dead. Drogo's a vegetable. And she's just had the most psychedelic dream of all. And she's basically on the edge of insanity and desperation at this point when she ties Miriam Azor to that bonfire and puts the eggs in there. I mean, she's definitely riding the edge of madness and despair at that point. And all she has to go on is these visions that she's been having. Everything else has fallen apart, but she keeps having these dreams about dragons. She keeps touching the egg and getting these visions. And there's one thing she knows at this point is, I'm going to put those eggs inside this fire and see what the fuck happens. And to me,
she's so tough, man. She is really tough, though. Like, we have to give that to her. Like, trekking through the Red Waste, like, how many people would survive that alone, right? I mean,
I actually think that this and what you touched upon there, LML, is one of the reasons why people feel alienated from Dany, is because obviously in the show, for very obvious reasons, they had to age up Dany's character. That wasn't going to go down very well if they'd have stuck with a 13-year-old child in that role. But because George R. R. Martin wrote a 13-year-old girl, she thinks, behaves, and makes decisions and acts in the way a 13-year-old girl perhaps would, faced with these crazy circumstances. And then in the show, we see a much older woman behaving in a way that we think she maybe shouldn't behave because she's an older woman, and she, so it's very difficult to see an older woman behaving in the way that a 13-year-old character would realistically, when obviously she's an adult in the show. And I think that's where it just didn't translate. I know why they had to age up the characters, and I do agree that they had to do that.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. That probably does. And also in the show, you know, she's I don't know that, you know, I think she's come into her own as an actress, but in the first season or two, like she didn't quite, I mean, I don't know. It'd be really hard.
Overacted, would you say?
Well, it's just there's some of that, and it's a little bit stiff. And I mean, to really sell the desperation of that storyline at times would have been really, really tough for anybody. So yeah, I guess you're right, Gemma. The show definitely spins how people feel about Dany, but I've always found her sympathetic. I've always found her interesting, and I've always found it interesting the way that Martin plays with tropes and sort of inverts them and cuts against them. You know what? If I can have like 60 seconds here, what I have to say about Martin and tropes is that he doesn't defy them. He takes the tropes and he pulls them down into the mud by asking, what would this really be like? Like, what would it really be like to be the lost heir of a dynasty? Well, it's like, well, it'd be pretty rough, first of all, because you're homeless and the people that you're with are traumatized, you know? And it's like, what would it really be like to hatch dragons? It's like, well, you'd have to be on the edge of madness and totally desperate, and there'd have to be a lot of loss of life. And then it's like, well, what is it like to actually have a dragon? Well, it's pretty hard. You know, it's that question that George always asks about Aragorn's taxes. It's not just Aragorn's tax policy. It's like all of it. Like, what would it be like to be resurrected? You know, he's talked a lot about that. It's like, it's not easy. It's like, it's bad. You lose a lot. There's a cost. It's not pretty, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same thing. Dany's arc is just full of that. It's like, yes, it's tropey, you know, but at every point he's asking, well, what would this really be like? And then showing us the gritty reality of it.
I think that's biggest misunderstanding with Martin too, is that, you know, he isn't this classical writer. He totally, he's influenced by some of the greatest stories that were ever written. You know, he's recycling a lot of these ideas, but just doing it a little bit differently in a way that isn't cookie cutter. So Gemma, we'll get on to you, and then we're gonna shout out some people in the chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was nodding like a nodding dog through that entire 60 seconds of your trope rant there, LML. I could not agree more. I've said very similar things. George R. R. Martin does not demolish the tropes, but he certainly grounds them. Yeah, that is a great point, and I could not agree more. Kyle, let's give some people a shout out. There's quite a few now.
By the way, this is my all-time favorite episode already, and we're 20 minutes in. Everyone, hype and love in the chat for LML and Gemma. Killing it, okay? We're not just talking about killing it. We're talking about killing it. So I don't know what I'm saying. Happy 420, everyone. I see some amazing people in the chat. We got 2 donations. Emilio always does his pre-stream donation. Emilio, thank you so much, my man. And then we have Steven Stark. He says, hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late. Looking forward to the Dany talk. Don't be sorry, my friend. I appreciate that generous $10 donation. And we got Karen, the sugar mama of hype, in the chat. Christy of Oldstone, Kelly Lossman, the original David Adams, Talamasca Dan, and a bunch of really other awesome people. If anybody's from Lucifer Means Lightbringer's channel, welcome. We're happy to have you here. And of course, we're ready to get on to the next point. Are we ready to break it down some more?
Can I just, I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing all these Reloris in the chat with the burning hearts. I love it. Well, is hype and love. That's hype and love.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought maybe it was a lot of enthusiasm for the religion of Relora, the one true God. Which is, you know.
Well, you know, it's funny. I told them the story of how I became this YouTuber, Azor Ahai. You know, I had a different name before, but for me to even consider doing this, you know, I actually lost my apartment to a fire with like 90% of my belongings 5 years ago. Then I ended up getting hurt and hurting my back and losing my girlfriend and almost like everything. Like I was in a bunch of debt, and now I'm reborn and happy and healthy again. So that's why we do the whole hype and love thing, because like I'm reborn, kind of like Jon Snow is. I don't know. And then people started calling me the hype that was promised, and then it all turned out into this thing. And then we're not Relorists, we're hype and lovists, if that makes any sense.
The one true God, Relora, thanks you for your worship. All the same.
Oh God.
As I said to you the other day, may your shadow babies kill with accuracy and speed.
Well, That is quite an odd saying. I guess you guys say that on your channel, or like I'm confused.
No, I'm just freelancing. Go ahead.
All right. Well, we always have some funny banter here on the channel, and there you go. Lucifer means Lightbringer has a nice joke to tell us. Now on to the next point. Now, this is something that I've really been involved in lately is Norse mythology. And of course, Daenerys has a very interesting story arc, and she's trying to break the wheel. We hear this specifically in the show for sure. And she's on this crazy long journey. We hope that she's going to get back to Westeros at some point after the Myronese knot in the books. And is Daenerys a dead ringer, though? Comparison for Jormungand in Norse mythology, the serpent that encircles the world. What do we think about this, Gemma? Is she going to return to the Iron Throne and finally kind of complete her destiny, essentially?
Well, we keep coming back to Ragnarok, don't we? And the more I look into this Norse mythology, I've gone back and I've ordered more books to my husband's delight. I just keep adding books to my bookshelf, and I've got a little respective stack of Norse mythology now. And the more I look at this, the more it just blows my mind. All these connections and this story. I found Needle in one of the stories I was looking at the other day, but that's not really relevant to this point. But yeah, Jormungand, the world serpent. Now, Dany's not snakes, but dragons, serpents. Jormungand is supposed to be so massive that he can circle the entire world and then swallow his tail, which we have spoken about before. Maybe this could be Quaid's prophecy about going west and going east. And if you think about, that's essentially a circling of the earth, isn't it, of the world? One thing I found when I was kind of doing a little bit of research into this was an aspect of Jormungand. Some people call it Jormungander, Jormungand. There's so many different pronunciations, so I'll just go between several different ones here. But it's seen as this relationship between Daenerys and Robert Baratheon, because if you look at the Storm Lord being we don't do one for ones, we keep saying that, but if we look at the storm god Robert Baratheon being Thor in Norse mythology, Jormungand and Thor are arch enemies, and they're kind of set up to kill each other in Ragnarok. And in the Song of Ice and Fire, Dany and Robert Baratheon are arch enemies. He's obviously sent assassins over. Perhaps Dany's ultimate demise, in the books at least, will occur at Storm's End. Who knows? My final point on Jormungand, and this is something I want LML to bounce off from, because I know you've got a lot of really good stuff to say about this. I will just quickly say Dany's got a lot of Surtur in her as well. Just putting that out there. But Jormungand is a sea serpent. And I was thinking, how is a sea serpent related to this goddess of fire and dragons? Perhaps this is a tenuous link, and I know you can expand on this, LML, to Dany's need for ships. Because ultimately she spends much of her journey trying to obtain a way across the sea. Maybe a hint towards a future marriage to Victarion or Euron Greyjoy, perhaps. But I'm going to hand that one over to you, LML, because you've got far more interesting stuff to say about that than I do.
Well, she does. Hang on. I'm getting a feedback
Gemma?
all of a sudden.
I think it's you. Try again.
Okay. Hey, there we go. All right, sorry, I was getting the double. I mean, I like to hear my own voice, but not twice. Anyways, yes. So you might be thinking of the scene where Dany is aboard a ship named after a dragon, watching her dragons dive into the sea. That's one of my favorite Dany Sea Dragon quotes, and I do have that one queued up. But real quick, I want to respond to something that you said about Jormungand being a dragon that circles the world. That's kind of one version of the Ouroboros, of course. And George gives us a couple of dragon Ouroboros or Ouroborai in the story. One would be the sigil of House Toland, which has a dragon biting its tail, and that symbolizes how they sent out their fool dressed up as their champion to fight against Aegon the Conqueror with Blackfire. And so they're kind of saying, look, we pulled the dragon's tail or whatever. But it is an Ouroboros, and they refer to that as the dragon representing time. But there's a better one with Daenerys. And so I'll pull this quote for you. And it says, Viserion sensed her disquiet. The white dragon lay coiled around a pear tree, his head resting on his tail. When Dany passed, his eyes came open, 2 pools of molten gold. His horns were gold as well, and the scales that ran down his back from head to tail. You're lazy, she told him, scratching under his jaw. His scales were hot to the touch, like armor left too long in the sun. Dragons are fire-made flesh. She had read that in one of her books that Sir Jorah had given her as a wedding gift. You should be hunting with your brothers. Have you and Drogon been fighting again? Our dragons were growing wild of late. Rhaegal had snapped at Eyrie, and Viserion had set Resnak's Tokar ablaze the last time the Seneschal had called. I have left them too much to themselves, but where am I to find time for them? So that's kind of a cool one. Right after that, Viserion whacks the tree and knocks a pear out of the tree and then flies off. So there's more symbolism there to be had, but pretty cool Ouroboros, right, Gemma?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was talking about Jesus Christ earlier on, wasn't I? It's not an apple coming out of a tree, but it's a pear coming out of a tree, which definitely has those Garden of Eden connotations, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. And the Garden of Eden is all over the place in this story. I've talked about it a few times. The whole Fire of the Gods theme, which really defines the concept of Lightbringer, draws heavily from the Garden of Eden. That's one version of the Fire of the Gods coming to man. And it's just, it's all over the story. But let me get to the sea dragon stuff here. So first, before we go to that scene with the ships named after dragons, which I do love, there's a forgotten part of the Azor Ahai prophecy. It's never mentioned by Melisandre or by Salador San when he's reciting the legend to Davos. But there's one time when Stannis is talking to Davos. So listen to this. Davos is saying, he's protesting about Edric's storm. And Stannis says, Edric is one boy. He may be the best boy who ever drew breath, and it would not matter. My duty is to the realm. His hand swept across the painted table. How many boys dwell in Westeros? How many girls? How many men? How many women? The darkness will devour them all, she says. The night that never ends. She talks of prophecies. A hero reborn in the sea. Living dragons hatched from dead stone. She speaks of signs and swears they point to me. I never asked for this, no more than I asked to be king. Yet dare I disregard her? So I'm sure you caught that. A hero reborn in the sea. That's like, I'm assuming Melisandre said something about that to Stannis, but that's never a part of the prophecy. Have either of you guys ever noticed that one?
No, that's not one I've come across before. But it is, like you said, and we have to remember throughout this story, and George R. R. Martin tells us all the time, these are unreliable narrators. And that's why we have to look for these little gems that are hidden. Because like you said, Stannis is a very matter-of-fact person. He wouldn't just go around making up parts of prophecy for the sake of it. Clearly, at some point, this snippet has been gleaned to him from either Melisandre or from another source. So for him to just drop that in, it's, blink and you miss it. And then it's not part of that headcanon that we've all created. I actually don't think Azor Ahai is a literal person. I know Kyle has.
Oh, I'm ready to drop something.
No,
I'm ready to drop something right now.
Let's leave that part on hold, because that's a good conversation we can have. So let me finish this point about the sea dragon. So here is this is Illyrio talking to Tyrion, and he says, Viserys was Mad Aerys' son, just so. Daenerys is quite different. He popped a roasted lark into his mouth and crunched it noisily, bones and all. It's gross. The frightened child who sheltered in my manse died on the Dothraki sea and was reborn in blood and fire. this dragon queen who wears her name is a true Targaryen. So there you go. Dany was reborn from the sea.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite of Illyrio's. He comes up with some great. He's got some great one-liners, hasn't he? Some very quotable moments, and that's one of my favorites. That she died on the sea and
Totally.
was reborn. Yeah,
Well,
Yeah, it's a real tip to the prophecy. What were you saying, Kyle?
Well, the one interesting thing, talking about the hero's journey, me and you were talking about this the other day on Twitter privately. The belly of the beast part of the hero's journey. We're talking about the Campbellian myth, where he discusses the 3-act structure, where a hero undergoes his journey, and the belly of the beast is that moment where someone undergoes a transformation, and we're talking about what Gemma just said. Azor Ahai not necessarily just being a person, but perhaps a transformational moment we see for multiple characters. Now we see that with Davos. Obviously, we can attribute to what happens at the Battle of the Blackwater with him. But for Daenerys, it could be this moment of finally sailing to Westeros, where she's finally taking her destiny in her own hands. Right? I want to say she's waiting on other people to do things for her, but for me, what Stan has said. I had never had that pointed out to me, LML, but that's very interesting to me, because the serpent that encircles the world, the idea of this person, Daenerys being this person, this savior type of Azor Ahai-like figure, that moment, her going to Westeros, and that's really interesting to me. One thing I also wanted to point out is a couple of you pointed this out in the chat, and this is also in relation to the symbolism. The wheel being broken, or the Ouroboros, the symbol of House Targaryen. If you look closely, at least the one for the show, the 3 dragons are competing with each other to eat its own tail. And LML talked a little bit earlier about the Viserion sitting in the tree, and he was coiled, and his head was near his tail, nearly biting his tail. That's also something that we have to look at, and obviously points out that Daenerys' journey is there's hints. George is laying it right in front of us, essentially, in my opinion. Who wants to jump at that? I don't know.
Yeah, no, you sent me reeling. That was good. That was you were very good at segues. I have to give you that. I wish we had been recording earlier when Jenna had that dirty comment about segues. What was it, Jenna? You said I'll segue both of you or something.
Gemma wanted to segue into me or something, I think.
No, that's what I said.
I'm going to segue into you. I'm like, what did you just say to me, Gemma? That's inappropriate.
That's pretty moist, I have to say.
Well, that escalated.
Well, this podcast has taken a turn, everyone.
Okay, I'll pull it out of the gutter here. So you said belly of the beast. So Dany has a lot of George loves transformation experiences. He gives people multiple transformation experiences. And certainly the main one for Dany is the pyre and hatching the eggs. However, she does have a good belly of the beast experience that just popped into my head while you were talking, which was on the cog Balerion, the one named after Balerion the Black Dread, is when Quaithe comes to her in that dream. And that's the first time that Quaithe, openly astrally projects in front of Dany, using a glass candle, presumably, and basically starts giving her, reinforcing the things that she told her in person. To go forward, you must go back. To reach the light, you must touch the shadow, on and on and on. And so it's not like one turning point experience, but those Quaithe scenes collectively are a turning point, and that culminates in the last chapter of A Dance with Dragons, when she's getting loopy and walking through the grass and hearing the stars speak to her with Quaithe's face as a mask of starlight. And that's when she turns and, back to her dragon heritage or whatever. But when you say belly of the beast, we were talking about Jonah, who was literally in the belly of the whale, and Davos, who finds himself in a tavern called the Belly of the Whale, and in a prison in the Wolf's Den. And then here's Dany, and she's, down in the dark at night, inside the ship Balerion. So that's sort of kind of a belly of the beast moment for you. I thought you'd like that.
One of the interpretations of Joseph Campbell's monomyth actually titles one of the stages as the belly of the beast, and George R. R. Martin does love to do that, doesn't he? He every now and again he slips in some reference that makes it very clear where on that staging of journey the character is. I really enjoyed where Dany was left in A Dance of the Dragons, like you said, with that embracing of the dragon. Remember who you are. Do you remember the dragons do? That wasn't an exact quote, but you get the gist off the top of my head. Because I think that says everything we need to know about where Dany is going from this point onwards. You know, we've seen her flip-flop. Let's call it what it is. She's flip-flopped. She woke the dragon and then she meandered for a long time. And I think, you know, she's reached the end of the book journey as we know it, as what's been released so far. And Tamaska Dan has said, why is being a dragon a good thing? I'm getting to that. I don't think it is, because her final thought is literally fire and blood. And that's pretty much going to be the future for Dany. I don't think we need that much more information. You know, they say they foreshadow it in the show, the Queen of Ashes, don't they? And I think Dany, for me, I like Dany. I enjoy her. I enjoy other characters a lot more. I'm not going to lie. She's a bit meh for me, and I think the show has tainted my opinion of her. But I think I think the most interesting turn for Dany is if she did end up being the antagonist that many people suspect she's going to be. I don't, you know, I can't call it either way, but I would enjoy that.
You want a hot take here? I actually disagree with you.
Oh, I think it's fake news as well.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll give a quick one, Kyle, so you can get in. So I think that when George is always talking about these Ice and Fire, you know, Song of Ice and Fire, Black and White, I think the goal is always resolution. And so what Dany is a dragon who plants trees. And she literally plants trees in Meereen. She plants fig trees. And so what I think is going to be her destiny is to embrace her dragon nature, but still be leaving seeds for the future. And she's doing that by breaking the chains of slavery, and potentially by, you know, if she has a child, or if she comes to Westeros and breaks the Iron Throne, or, you know, anything like that. Like she will be a cleansing fire that, you know, basically plows the fields for new seeds to plant. So I don't disagree that she's embracing her dragon nature and that it will be destructive, but it's not just going to be this swing towards total destruction. There will be an element of it, just like the cycle of the seasons turn, that sort of paves the way for spring, I think. So there you go.
Okay, I agree with that. My take on it is, if you try and put yourself in the shoes, I don't know if the White Walkers wear shoes, from the point of the perspective of the others, you know, we look at this tale of Ragnarok, this prophesized fiery death of the world. What's not to say that the others have their own prophecies, and their prophecy could very well be a Ragnarok Surta kind of vibe, in which case they're going to take one look at Dany and assume that, you know, that this is what's coming for us now, this fire and blood and death and destruction. And, you know, so from that point of view, that could potentially be their mission, to prevent this prophesized fiery figure that's coming to destroy everything. You know, I'm not saying that this would necessarily be a conscious thing on Dany's part, but, you know, there's that whole Mad Queen thing that's been hinted at, and it's just going to be fascinating, actually, to see where she goes. I think her story has meandered for too long in both book and show. I am concerned that she's being set up to be sidelined on the show, however.
The one thing that I found interesting about both of your points is you know, the dream of spring was brought up by LML, and Dany being a dragon that plants seeds. And I think, you know, going back to the story of Ragnarok again, people literally think it's the apocalypse and everything ends, but that's not what happens after the end of Ragnarok. These two people take over at the end, and they essentially build a new world. And I think that's where we're headed. The cripples, bastards, and broken things theory, where people like Samwell and Tyrion and Sansa at the end of the story are left, and they try to figure out some way to change this hereditary monarchy that's not been working. And I talked about this yesterday on the channel on my live stream, talking about the Iron Throne kind of being an allusion to the one true ring in Lord of the Rings, where is it going to be melted? Is this thing that needs to go? And Daenerys' goal has always been to come back and reclaim the seat of her house. So I tend to agree with disagree with Gemma on that point, that she will become the Mad Queen and become obsessed with that, because I think that she is more grounded and she has experienced more to know that is just, like her father is an example of that, right? So I think that that's kind of where we're headed with that. And she will finally realize that her main goal wasn't all that it was wasn't like all like glitters and gold and like roses at the end of it. And that's kind of disappointing for her,
No, she cares every step of the way. She has shown a heart and trying to care for people. It hasn't always worked out, but she's not a sociopath at all. She does not show sociopathic tendencies like many other characters, in my opinion. So
no, and this is what I mean about it not necessarily being a conscious consideration on her part. I actually think if you put together what all three of us are saying here, we're actually all on the same page, just different interpretations of it and different stages. If we're looking at this Ragnarok thing, Dany could be the inadvertent bringer of the Song of Ice and Fire version of Ragnarok, but it could also be her child of Ice and Fire, because I do think Jon and Dany will probably have a baby in the book too, unfortunately. Yeah. But
so hey, we got a couple things in the chat here I want to shout out real quick. Carol Brown says, so Dany is a dragon laying eggs, and as opposed to planting trees, the more appropriate idiom would be laying eggs. And yes, even if they're I don't know if she'll have children, but it could also be just in the sense of symbolically, seeds for the future. And so that's a great point. And then Stephen Stark sent in a super chat and says, Dany is a liberator, not a leader, or evil. She might be evil. And I don't think she's evil, but it's interesting. The point, liberator, not a leader, meaning like not a good city manager necessarily, but she is a liberator. So that's kind of what I mean by the cleansing fire. Like she'll come along and burn out all the rot that needs to be burnt out and leave a fertile field and maybe a couple seeds. As somebody else will have to grow them and manage a new realm or, realms or however that works. So yeah, I agree with that in a sense.
Absolutely. There's a lot of sentiment in the chat actually along those lines as well. She's a conqueror, not a leader. She's been likened to Alexander the Great. And that's even said, isn't it, to her in the show specifically, that you're not a ruler, you're a conqueror. What are you going to, and even Tyrion in season 7 starts talking about what's after this. Once you've done all your conquering and broken the wheel, then what? And she really doesn't have an answer for him, does she?
Yeah,
what's really interesting? Oh no, go ahead, Elmo.
I was just going to say, I like that the show has picked up on those themes. It's in the book too, where she's being forced to consider, what will it be like if she invades Westeros with Dothraki? What would that really look like? And it's the same thing when she brings, right. And that's the same thing if she brings dragons. It's like, well, I don't want to destroy Westeros. So both the show and the book are approaching that. Go ahead, Kyle.
Well, it was just interesting because I was thinking to The Last Jedi when Luke is teaching Rey. Has everybody seen The Last Jedi here on the panel?
I would hope so.
Anyways, when Luke is telling her there's a darkness within the island, but he's essentially telling her that there needs to be death to be rebirth. And I think that the point that you made, obviously burning out the rot and all of that. We see it on planet Earth here through nature, volcanic activity. It's the most fertile land on the planet. Yes, it's destructive, but at the end of it, there's this amazing chemistry that happens. You know what I mean? And I think that it's a sentiment that George is trying to talk about too. You got to go through all the shit to get to the good part. You know what I mean? Same thing Kyle, with like bad relationships too. You go through crappy relationships to get to the good one. You know?
Yeah, totally. And this gives me an opportunity to shout out my first panel at Con of Thrones Friday morning at 10. You don't have a panel at that time, right?
No, we have our first one is with you on Friday at 2 p.m.
Okay, so Friday morning, if you're there and you're not enthralled by the opening ceremonies, then come to the nature cycle mythology panel that I'll be doing, because nature cycle mythology, I think, is the most important mythology in A Song of Ice and Fire. And all of the stuff we're talking about is tied into it. All of the stuff about transformation, about death paving the way for life and the cleansing fire. We're really just talking about the cycle of the seasons and the life cycle, where winter and darkness and death are not evil, but simply a part of the natural process that's necessary. And the evil thing is stopping this cycle of nature, where we have a long night, where the night never gives way to day, winter never gives way to spring, and then you have all these undead creatures that are violating the life cycle. And so all three cycles are being violated. And this is like, it underlies almost every character in the story, all of the cycles, all of these things that we're talking about. It ultimately ties back into it's the sense in which ice and fire are supposed to be in balance, just like you said with the Jedi Island that's got the dark place underneath the Jedi temple. It's like, yeah, the dark side and the light side of the Force are meant to balance each other, and they're doing a better job in this new Star Wars trilogy of exploring that, I think, and not just showing the side of good triumph over the side of darkness, which is something the original movies actually kind of got wrong. Not wrong, but like a little bit two-dimensional in their philosophy. And I think they're trying to rectify that. And there's a super chat here that builds on these thoughts from Carol Brown. And she said, to add to Stephen Stark's thought, what if Dany's arc is like Robert's? She can battle but not rule. She'll suffer a similar fate. Dany will die. I think that's a great point, and that's exactly what we're saying. Like, Dany is a conqueror and perhaps not the best at sitting the throne. And of course, Robert's famous quote is, he was never so alive when winning the throne and never so dead while sitting it. So that's a nice one, Carol. What do you guys think about that?
I personally, by the way, there's people saying The Last Jedi sucks in the chat. I personally loved it.
Let's not even go there. I thought it was good too.
I won't even go there though. But yeah, Gemma, you go first.
Calling back to what you were saying about when all is said and done, this cleansing and this rebirth, essentially, like Kyle said before, and I know we keep coming back to Ragnarok, but it is a literal tale of ice and fire. That there's the parallels are, like I've said, uncanny, and it's not an apocalyptic story. It's a story of rebirth and what happens afterwards, and the ending, the parting sentiment of Ragnarok is essentially, and the game continues anew. And I think that's exactly where we're going to be left with. The path will be cleared, the wheat will be separated from the chaff, and we will then be set up for it to all slowly go downhill once again in many years in the future, and they'll have to do it all over again, and you can kind of see that. But yeah, it's like you said, it's all about this rebirth. I'll come to your panel, LML. I'll be there. I'll drag Kyle out of bed, and we'll come down.
I want to plug the panel. Actually, that was my comment. Crowfood's daughter is on that one with you, right, LML?
Absolutely, yep. And
Quinn from Ideas of Ice and Fire is also great. Crowfood's daughter actually donated to our Con of Thrones GoFundMe. So
nice.
We thanked her a while ago, but we'll thank her again, and she's fantastic. I think that if we get a chance, if our schedule is open, we will try to check that one out. We're not quite sure what's going on for everything.
Yeah, there's a lot of panels, and there's a lot of overlapping and a lot of conflicts. So, do what you got to, but just wanted to throw that one in there. It's fun. It's kind of funny that they gave me that first hour to start the panel. It's like, well, it's all about beginnings and endings and nature cycles. So it's a good way to start, I think.
I think they did a really good job, though. Speaking of the schedule, like I looked at it, and there's so many good ones. Honestly, you really can't go wrong. Whichever one you go to. I mean, there's fun ones. There's ones about food. There's ones that are show only. Some that are book only. It's really going to be a great time, and I'm for one looking super forward to the Warrior of Light panel because the Azor Ahai prophecies and that is really one of my favorite topics to discuss.
And by the way, I wanted to point out that we're already an hour into this. So if this had been a panel, we'd already be out of time.
Yeah,
I know.
It just shows you how hard it's going to be. Like, I mean, the outline is just going to have like 3 points on it, and that's it. I mean, I don't even know.
Right, it's funny that you mentioned that right now. Just looking at it, you know what I mean? Like, we only do get 50 minutes. So, and that's something that we discussed before the podcast, privately, like, hey, like, how are we going to structure this? Like, who's going to talk and say this and that? Like, what are we going to talk about? And that's the really difficult thing because this is the first time I'll be doing it. Gemma, first time for you. It'll be the first time for you, LML.
Yeah, this will be my first con of any kind. Period.
Wow.
I've never even been to a con. So,
dude, you are gonna be super happy. It's gonna be awesome. But wow, thanks for pointing that out. Now I'm at least conscious of like looking forward. You know what I mean? Being conscious of that.
Yes, whatever con thing you've got, get it ready.
Tam Hutchins has asked in the chat, will you guys be publishing your con schedules? I know I certainly will be on Twitter and Facebook. So I assume you guys will. I know you already have, haven't you, Kyle? I think.
Yeah, I have on Patreon and on Facebook and Twitter as well. I'll be doing it again right before the con, just so people can be aware about it. And we got an Azor Hype booth as well. So me and Gemma will be. You can come meet us at the booth. We're gonna allot some time for that and whatnot. So I'll definitely have a schedule. Once because a week before we find out some of the stuff that we're going to be doing some really special stuff. So we kind of have to adjust our schedules, and we won't know till about a week before really what our full schedules are. So until then, yeah. Oh my goodness. Karen Sugar Mama of Hype, man. Another donation. Like she needs a special title. I want to call her the Iron Bank of Karen. Is that appropriate?
She's the sugar mama. She's hitting us with the sugar right here. I mean, that's what sugar mamas do.
Put some sugar on me. I know nobody wants to hear me sing. We always lose viewers when I do that. But I think it's appropriate now. Like we've discussed the main points. Do we want to kind of get a prediction, a quick prediction in for each of us about Daenerys, and then maybe open up to a few questions?
I still, I guess I don't have to actually read the quote. I had the quotes pulled with the ships, but the main thing.
No, do it. We got time.
Okay, I'll go real quick. So they're on these 3 ships. She's named them after the 3 dragons. And the funny thing is, it starts by she's looking at her blood riders, and they're not handling the trip well. Mostly they're below decks, and when they come up, they're throwing up. And the Dothraki they hate the ocean. They're scared of the ocean. And it's much as made of like how badly they're doing. And then it contrasts that with Dany saying, no squall could frighten Dany, though. Daenerys Stormborn, she was called, for she had come howling into the world on distant Dragonstone as the greatest storm in the memory of Westeros howled outside, a storm so fierce that it ripped gargoyles from the castle walls and smashed her father's fleet to kindling. The narrow sea was often stormy, and Dany had crossed it 100 times as a girl, running from one free city to the next, half a step ahead of the usurper's hired knives. And that's actually a point I wanted to make earlier that I forgot to say, is that, in the first books especially, Robert is set up as the enemy in Dany's mind, if nothing else. She's always thinking about the usurper. Even after Robert is dead, she thinks about him. So even though they never fight, they're set up as enemies. And that's one of the ways that George uses his influences, is a lot of times they're very soft. He doesn't hit you over the head with it. He's not going to resurrect Robert and have Dany fight Gendry just to make it come true. Like, it's enough that they think about each other as opposites. But picking back up with the quote, it says, She loved the sea. She liked the sharp, salty smell of the air and the vastness of horizons bounded only by a vault of azure sky above. So there's an emphasis on like a sea that's unbounded, that circles the world. It's sort of implied there. It says it made her feel small but free as well. She liked the dolphins that sometimes swam alongside Balerion, slicing through the waves like silvery spears, and the flying fish she glimpsed. She even liked the sailors with all their songs and stories. Once on a voyage to Bravos, as she watched the crew wrestle down a great green sail in a rising gale, she had even thought how fine it would be to be a sailor. But when she told her brother, Viserys had twisted her hair until she cried. "You are blood of the dragon," he had screamed at her. "A dragon, not some smelly fish." So I always like that one because
I always love that.
so that implies Dany as a fish in this scene where she's like, I love the sea and I love my boats that are named after dragons, which is basically just, that's a sea dragon. It's so when we talk about the belly of the beast, if the ship is a dragon, she's literally in the belly of the ship. So she's in the belly of a beast. Like, I just want to make sure everyone got that joke. Like, it's hitting you over the head with belly of the beast, literally. So yeah, Martin is aware of the Joseph Campbell steps and all that stuff. He knows all these things, and he's giving us covert literary winks at him with phraseology like that. And then the other thing that I want to quote is when the dragons are actually diving into the water, because that's sort of a, let's see. Here we go. Viserion's scales were the color of fresh cream. His horns, wing bones, and spinal crest a dark gold that flashed bright as metal in the sun. Rhaegal was made of the green of summer and the bronze of fall. They soared above the ships in wide circles, higher and higher, each trying to climb above the other. Dragons always preferred to attack from above, Dany had learned. Should either get between the other and the sun, he would fold his wings and dive screaming, and they would tumble from the sky, locked together in a tangled, scaly ball, jaws snapping and tails lashing. The first time they had done it, she feared they meant to kill each other, but it was only sport. No sooner would they splash into the sea than they would break apart and rise again, shrieking and hissing, the salt water streaming off them as the wings clawed at the air. Drogon was aloft as well, though not in sight. So this is really nice. There's a bunch of stuff going on here. You see the reborn from the sea idea, where they she thought they were trying to kill each other as they dove into the sea. So that there's a death symbolism applied. And then it says they would rise again, which is resurrection language, rising from the sea, just like Azor Ahai reborn is supposed to rise from the sea. And then there's also, actually, go ahead and react to that, and then I'll give you the moon meteor side of this.
Go ahead, Jim.
It's the Jormungand again, isn't it? The circular nature, and they ball up together, don't they? In this sort of jumble of tails and heads, and so that also connects to this enveloping the world symbolism as well, which, like we said earlier, relates to the sea serpent. They're in the sea. The heat of the dragons is playing off the salt water in that it's steaming. It's all there, isn't it? And what initially feels like just a lovely piece of visual imagery in words and writing is actually utterly loaded with references and connotations and wider meanings, and this is why I don't think I could ever read these texts enough, because every time you see something new, don't you?
Exactly. And I didn't even catch the salt and smoke reference, but you're totally right. There's both salt and smoke. And then they're also coiled up into a ball, which does make, again, a dragon eating its tail image. So yeah, I mean, and I love how Martin layers the symbolism. Like, Dany is a dragon herself, talking about how she wants to be a sailor and how she loves the sea, and she's stormborn. She's on boats named after dragons. She's got her dragons diving into the water. She's remembering the story about how Viserys told her that she's not a fish. So it's like 5 times over this whole sea dragon symbolism being applied in this chapter. And that's how Martin generally does. Go ahead. What?
At least 5 times.
Right. And that's what makes, the common question I always get with my symbolic analysis. Well, how do you know? How can you be so sure? How do you know you're not just making it up or whatever? And it's like, well, I mean, you can't know for sure. It's subjective. Absolutely. But this is what makes it intelligible to follow, is that you pick up on a theme and you realize, okay, he's giving us the same theme like 5 times at least in one chapter. And so here's the last part of this scene. You guys know my basic theory about the moon meteors is that this Carthene legend about one day the moon wandered too close to the sun, cracked from the heat, and 1,000 dragons poured forth is actually a story about a moon wandering too close to the sun, meaning that it moved into eclipse position, and then some sort of impact disaster happened that sent moon meteors flying out, and those would be the dragons hatching from the moon. And so in this scene, a lot of that is recreated. It said this dragons like to attack with the sun at their back, which you can picture a dragon climbing up and then basically getting in between one dragon and the sun so that it's you can't see it. And so it's making an eclipse essentially. Then it dives down from the sky like a meteor, and the dragons even combine to make that ball shape, which really gives you like a dragon meteor image. And then that dragon meteor lands in the ocean. And I think that's part of the sea dragon symbolism, is that one of these meteors that came during the long night did indeed land in the ocean. Or I think the Arm of Dorn was a meteor impact. So that it could be that is what they're talking about, and essentially would have created tidal waves. And in the Ironborn myth, he talks about the sea dragon Naga that drowns whole islands in its wrath. And drowning islands to me sounds like, a tsunami. So I won't go off too far into that whole thing, but there is a whole layer of symbolism about sea dragons as meteor impacts in the ocean that cause floods. And so that's being acted out here. Go ahead.
And speaking about eclipse, we hear Balerion the Black Dread blacked out the sky. There's all of these connecting points. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Another something that somebody pointed this out in the chat. Another thing, you look at Jorah's name, Jormungand. Jorah is very, very similar. He's with Daenerys on her journey. So like, there's all of these little things that George plants within the story. Me and Gemma spoke about this previously. The word Tyr being the path to Tyr. Jaime Lannister possibly being an Azor Ahai like figure. Tyrion, Tywin meaning the path to. So there's all of these little layers that George has. If you look for them, you can find them. But I've had my mind blown a couple times today. Especially about the sea dragon, which was amazing.
Yeah, I just wanted to say Carol's donated again. She's posted our schedule, so I don't even know where my schedule is. So you've done a great job finding that for me, Carol. I assume it's on the Con of Thrones website. Thank you so much for doing that.
You can click on someone's name, Gemma, and it has their whole schedule for which panels they're appearing on. So you can type in Gemma, or you can look, like if you're on one panel, click on your name, and then it has your whole schedule.
Gotcha. You wanted final predictions for Danny, didn't you?
Yeah, so final prediction from everyone, and then we'll take a couple questions, and then we have a bonus part of the podcast where it's for Patreons only, and we will be talking about Lightbringer.
Ooh, juicy. I want to see yours in the chat as well. Quickie predictions. I've got 2, show and book, obviously. I'm going to try and keep these as succinct as possible. In the show, my final prediction for Daenerys, it's less of a prediction and more of a fear. I think it seems that she's being slowly maneuvered into a position where she's going to be sidelined over Jon. There's this whole theory, this idea that she's going to get pregnant. I mean, we were smacked over the head with foreshadowing for that towards the end of season 7. And then, of course, a lot of people are theorizing that she will die in childbirth, that being pregnant, she won't be able to fight or ride a dragon. I'm concerned. It's not necessarily a prediction, but it's certainly a concern. So, yeah, Show Danny could potentially fizzle out, which would be an absolute travesty. But in the books, 3 words, fire and blood. That's all I can say.
You troll. I knew you were going to say something like that, man. You're always trolly. LML.
Well, I've got two alternate predictions for the show. I'm not sure which one will happen, but I could see Jon and Dany riding on the same dragon into the final fight, and basically both of them dying in a sort of romantic dual sacrifice kind of situation. So they're both, it's like they have a romance together, but it's not meant to be like for this world kind of thing. And in the books, I don't think that Jon is meant to outlive the fight either. His resurrection is going to be not as clean as it is in the show, and he's not going to be, around forever. I think he could even become like the next Cold Hands, just sort of wandering the north forever, ranging the cold. But for Dany,
I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
I disagree with both of you on that.
The Jon coming back as so seemingly non-affected goes against everything that George R. R. Martin has taught us about resurrection. Look at Beric. Look at Lady Stoneheart. There's a price to this, and Jon in the books has to pay a price, as far as I'm concerned. I'm sorry I butted in.
Yeah.
I really wanted to tell you.
He's never going to sit the throne in the books, and I doubt he'll sit the throne in the show either. It'll even be, I at the most, it'll be a momentary distraction. Jon's Targaryen blood is important for magical reasons, primarily, in my opinion. The other thing is that as far as show Dany, I'm very concerned by that stunning white and gray snow dress that she was wearing. I mean, God, she looked a lot like the Night's Queen in that thing. So I'm very worried that they're going to turn her into a Night's Queen somehow. I mean, if I had to bet on any one thing happening, I would have bet on that. I mean, it could even be the very last.
Wow.
It could be the last thing that happens. Like, in order to pacify Night's Queen, she ends up like the camera pans away and she's standing there next to Night's Queen, and it's just like that's the sacrifice Dany had to make or some shit. I don't know. Or maybe she gets freed. Maybe you stab her with dragon glass and she wakes up again. I don't know. I mean, you got to kill her to put her out of her misery. I don't know, but she looked like a damn Night's Queen. She looked glorious. So I'm worried that's foreshadowing. What do you guys think?
And it did look a lot like some of the rivets that like the oldness, the weirwoodiness that the others have. The crevices they have. It was very odd looking. It was an allusion to that.
I think Jon and Dany, their relationship is certainly doomed, but I think as characters as well, they are doomed in the show. I'm talking show here, because their boat sex scene was overlaid, the Rhaegar and Lyanna wedding, these two lovers that died because of the last war, and then intersected with these, their relations, the two new lovers who will probably be doomed in exactly the same way that Rhaegar and Lyanna were doomed as a couple. Like you said, their purpose is almost transcendent, isn't it?
That's good, Gemma. First of all, I love that scene. I love the way they overlaid that. But I hadn't thought about that as a sort of doomed foreshadowing for them. But yeah, I agree. That makes sense.
I got one prediction for the show. I'm not sure what's going to happen in the books because I've just I don't know what's going to happen with it. I don't even know if we're ever going to get the book. Sorry, people. I know I'm kind of pessimistic on that.
Oh, hey, look, before we move on, there's something in the chat. Laura says, "Don't think so, LML. Mel will be the new Nissa, and Jon will do the task." So what if Jon's stabbing Dany like the Azor Ahai myth? What if it's to free her from Night's King bondage? What if she's Night's King and she's got blue star eyes and Jon's got to stab her in order to free her?
No, that would be like the saddest thing ever, right?
It would be sad, but it would be like the merciful thing to do. And so she has a moment of where she's not, she wakes up and she's like, "Oh, I love you," and then she dies or something. Or maybe she does. I don't know. But that would be a cool inversion of the Azor Ahai myth. And people have already noticed that the creation of the Night's King with the dragon glass does seem to be like a parallel to the Azor Ahai Nissa stabbing.
Yes.
Okay, so we talked about Ouroboros, and we also talked about Jormungand. The idea that this cycle keeps on happening. We see these symbols reflected. We actually see the symbol in the show a little bit. One thing that I actually think is going to happen is I actually think that, I know a lot of people aren't going to like this, but I think Daenerys is going to die in childbirth. And I think it's actually going to be a very similar scene to what happened with Ned and Lyanna. And I think that although Dany is brave, I could see her saying, I don't want to die. And that type of situation. And going back to, what Benjen said to Jon in the show, you don't know what you'd be missing, and to what Maester Aemon was telling Jon. I think that we could see a scene where Jon finally understands everything that Ned did for him, and the sacrifices that Rhaegar made to keep Lyanna safe. And I think that it's all going to fall on Jon, which is really sad. Him having found his second love, essentially, or his true love, and then Daenerys dying in childbirth. And I think it's going to be a repeat scene of Ned and Lyanna, because we see these moments in history within the Song of Ice and Fire happen again, like small little things. Like, for example, Arthur Dayne got stabbed in the back of the neck by Howland Reed, and when Ned and Jaime were fighting in the show, he got stabbed in the back of the leg when Ned was holding his own. So all these small little things, these comparisons, and I think that we're going to see Daenerys die in childbirth. But a lot of people say, well, Jon won't have anything to live for after that. Yes, he will. They're going to have a child together. And I think the idea of Ragnarok, going to my thing about these two people inheriting the world and changing it, I think that baby Sam and Jon and Dany's kid are going to be seen as the dream for spring, and that's going to be kind of where it goes. And Sam will write the Song of Ice and Fire or something like that. But I think that Daenerys is going to die.
But Kyle, none of that can happen because Jon and Dany are going to have to give their child to the others in order to pacify them. Don't you know that?
No, I think that all magic will be gone. I think that all magic will be gone in the end.
I'm just pulling your chain.
Wouldn't it be
Dix triggering me?
Wouldn't it be awesome if Dany and Jon's baby turned out to be a dwarf like Tyrion? I would love that. I would love that so much, and then became ruler of all of Westeros.
Mine is too cookie cutter. I understand. It's what I want. All right. I don't want Daenerys.
The series can only end with child sacrifice and misery and death. That's the only way.
Wow.
Maybe that's where the book and the show will truly diverge.
I think you will be. Yes.
Whatever the show does, George is going to be like, all right, well, my ending is going to be 5 times more twisted than that.
It's just going to be a big middle finger up to the show, isn't it?
Oh, it's going to really suck. George, don't do this. Don't do this.
But Kyle, to be more serious, I do think the no magic ending is possible. That itself is a fantasy trope, and I could see George rolling with that one. It lines up with some of my mythical astronomy symbolism a little bit. So, yeah.
I really don't know. It's so hard to say. Like, there's going to be another big twist. There's definitely going to be something that shocks us in the end. But there's lots of foreshadowing and there's lots of things. But we definitely need another book because all of our pondering turns into Ned Stark is still alive and Rhaegar is still alive theories, which are just the bane of my existence. I don't even want to start with those.
Are we going to have...
But shall we take a couple of questions?
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of questions and then we're going to have to sign off and record this bonus podcast because I'm a few hours ahead of you guys in the UK. It's already dark outside, so...
yes, it's wine 30. It's wine 30 over in the UK.
It's actually what? It's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 4:20. Wait, Eastern Standard Time 4:20. Sorry if that wasn't for anyone else. Sorry, guys.
I'm currently being disappointed by the lack of cannabis themed emojis available here.
Is there?
I'm gonna have to settle for this generic green leaf with a dragon next to it. That's all I got.
Cannabis leaf I have ever seen. That's how.
I'll add a mushroom just to sort of imply,
You know what? You know what, guys? I got a proposition for everyone. Since it's getting pretty late
also,
for Gemma,
it's also Earth Day.
I'll make a proposition here to LML right live. Put him in the hot seat. So we're all going to be at Con of Thrones together, and it's getting pretty late for Gemma, and we have to record our special episode of the podcast, Lightbringer. How about we do another podcast, but together, and we'll record it, and we'll release it on one of our channels. But we'll do another podcast together at Con of Thrones in our little hotel room, because we've talked about you coming to hang out with us anyways. Would you be down for that?
Absolutely. I'm honored. Let's do it.
Okay, so people in chat, is that okay with you if we do that? We give you another episode with LML. We don't take questions today. We do got to go do our bonus stuff, but we give you another podcast together in person at Con of Thrones. How about that? I think they'll be okay with that. I'll take that as a yes.
The chat has descended into...
Linda R has said yes, and Linda R's word is the truth, so we're going with that.
The chat has completely descended into emojis of burning leaves and cigarettes, and there's no more questions in there anyway.
So before we sign off, everyone, of course, what I would like to do is in the description of this video, you can go check out the links to Lucifer Means Lightbringer's Patreon and subscribe to his channel. Yeah, LML, you want to talk a little bit about what you do on your channel?
So everything to find me is Lucifer Means Lightbringer. My website is lucifermeanslightbringer.com. My YouTube channel is called Lucifer Means Lightbringer. The podcast, if you're looking for on iTunes, it's called Mythical Astronomy of Ice and Fire. But you can always find all the links to everything, including my Patreon, at lucifermeanslightbringer.com. So there you go. I'm doing lots of symbolism and stuff. You guys pretty much got an idea of what I'm talking about just from this episode today, so I won't belabor the point. Just come check it out. There's lots more to be enjoyed. Like, for example, just the way we took that chapter with Dany on the boats with the dragons there. That's a fun chapter, but it's kind of an in-between chapter in the book. She's just on a boat ruminating. Nothing really happens in that chapter, but there's all kinds of crazy symbolism going on there. So every chapter in A Song of Ice and Fire is a finely crafted gem like that. And I'd say what my podcast does is we try to take those chapters and expand them and just sort of highlight the symbolic hologram that's being cast there, if you will, by the language. So that's what my podcast is about. If you're into that, come check it out.
And of course, like I said in the description of this video, if you do want to go check out and support LML here, it's all in the description. And my co-host, Gemma.
Yeah, I'm Gemma. You know who I am and where I'm at and where to find me. All the links, blah, 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 description below, yada, yada. But yeah, check out LML's stuff if you haven't already. I'm not going to lie. The first time I got chatting with you, LML, on Twitter, I was fangirling all over the place because I was already a fully fledged and established fan of everything you do, and this was a while ago. So if you're not familiar with LML's body of work, what have you been doing? Go and check it out. It's deep and it's spectacular and it's utterly mind-blowing. We've got a year to go still, so you've got plenty of time. I'm going to sign out, and thank you everybody for joining us in the chat today.
Thank you, of course, to all the people who donated through the super chat, all of the positive words. You guys were just having an absolute blast today, and I gotta say, this is probably our favorite episode so far. We've had a bunch of fun ones, but of course, we are really, really excited to have the GOAT of symbolism in the Song of Ice and Fire community, in my opinion, on the podcast today. And for those of you who
for having me on.
Wow. I wish I could end it right there. But for those of you who do want to check out that bonus episode for patrons only, we want to do a little special something for you guys supporting us. So Lightbringer bonus podcast is coming up in just a little bit. And yeah, if you do want to check that out, link to all of our patrons in the description of this video. But thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. Lucifer Means Lightbringer will be on the channel again, and we'll see you in the next podcast. Hype and love, everyone. Wait, is that a goat?
Goat Boy at Saturday Night Live.
Bye, everyone.